I almost ended my wife's life. I had a gun in my right hand. I had her in my sights from 12 feet away. My finger was on the trigger, and the only thing that stopped me from pulling that trigger was a knock on my front door at 9:51 at night. My next door neighbor was at the door returning a cordless drill he had borrowed from me 3 weeks earlier. He has no idea he saved my wife's life that night. He has no idea he saved my own life that night either, because if I had pulled that trigger, I would not be sitting here right now telling this story. Folks, this is the story of how a man almost crashes out over the woman he gave 14 years of his life to. I own an auto repair shop in Ohio. I am 51 years old. I built this shop from a single bay garage with one used lift and a wrenched out toolbox in 2004, about 8 years before I ever met my wife. Today, I have 4 bays, 5 mechanics on payroll, and we do everything from oil changes to full transmission rebuilds. It is the only thing I have ever owned that is fully mine. I met my wife in 2012 at a small gathering a buddy of mine was throwing. She was 36 years old and divorced once already. She had 2 kids from her first marriage, and I had 2 kids from mine. All 4 of those kids are now grown and out of the house. The youngest is 24 and the oldest is 31. We got married 18 months after we met in early 2014. She was a real estate agent, decent at her job, but she made roughly half what the shop was bringing in on a slow year. On paper, I was the breadwinner from day one. Now I am going to be honest with the men listening to this story right now. The first 10 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect. Nobody's marriage is perfect, but good. We took an annual vacation. We paid off her car. We put a new roof on the house. We helped one of her kids through nursing school. I do not look back on those 10 years and feel like a fool. I look back on the last 4 years and feel like a fool because in the last 4 years, things slowly changed. She started staying out later for what she called showings. She started keeping her phone face down on every flat surface in our home. She bought new lingerie that I never saw on her one time. She lost about 22 pounds and started going to the gym 5 nights a week. She stopped touching me. She stopped telling me she loved me. And like a lot of guys listening to this, I told myself it was probably menopause or stress or burnout from her job or a phase. I gave her every benefit of every doubt I could give her because I did not want it to be the other thing. And then one afternoon at my auto repair shop, the other thing walked right through my front door. There was a man, I am going to call him Mark, who had been a customer of mine for the last 6 years. Mark was 47 years old. He drove a black BMW X5, the kind with the optional M Sport package, all the bells and whistles. He brought it in twice a year for service like clockwork, brake jobs, oil changes, the occasional electrical issue. And over those 6 years, Mark and I had become what I would call friendly, not friends, friendly. He would sit in my waiting area drinking coffee, and we would talk for 20 minutes about football, about the price of gas, about the local economy. I had shaken this man's hand probably 18 times over 6 years. I had given him my personal cell phone number once when his BMW would not start in a parking lot. I had even invited him to the small barbecue I throw at the shop every Memorial weekend for my customers. He came to that barbecue 3 years in a row, and every single one of those 3 years, my wife was at that barbecue. I want every guy listening to this to sit with that for a second. Mark dropped his BMW off at my shop one afternoon at about 2:18 p.m. He had called the day before with 2 separate complaints. First, his battery was draining overnight. Second, his aftermarket dash cam was acting up. He said it kept restarting itself every time he turned the vehicle on, and the screen kept flashing a card error message. I told him to bring it in and we would look at both issues. I diagnosed the parasitic battery drain first. I traced about 220 milliamps of constant draw to the dashcam circuit itself, not abnormal for a dashcam in parking surveillance mode, but enough to drain the battery on a vehicle that mostly sits during the week. Then I moved on to the dashcam itself. Mark had a dual-channel aftermarket dashcam mounted to his rearview mirror. It recorded the front of the vehicle and it recorded the cabin with full audio. It is the same kind of dashcam a lot of rideshare drivers and small business owners use these days for liability protection. When a dashcam is throwing a card error and restarting itself every time the vehicle turns on, 99% of the time, the issue is the SD card itself, full, corrupted, or improperly formatted. The fix is to pull the card, copy everything off it for the customer in case there is footage of an accident he wants to keep, reformat the card, and reinstall it. It is a routine 10-minute job. I unmounted the dash cam, pulled the SD card out of it, and walked it back to my office computer. I plugged the SD card into my desktop. Before I reformatted it, I wanted to verify there was nothing important on it that Mark would want backed up. I opened the most recent file on the card to check, and what I saw on my own computer screen ended my marriage in less than 4 minutes. The most recent file on Mark's dash cam was from the previous afternoon. I clicked play. The cabin camera was pointed at the front 2 seats. Mark was in the driver's seat, and in the passenger seat, wearing a white blouse I had bought her for her last birthday, was my wife. I did not move. I did not breathe. I just watched. She was laughing about something. Mark put his hand on her thigh. She did not move it away. She leaned over and kissed him on the mouth. Then she said something that I have replayed in my head probably 200 times since that afternoon. She said, "I cannot wait until this is over." Mark asked her what she meant. She said, "I am tired of pretending with him." She said, "Once the divorce is final, I will get half of everything, including the shop, and we will be set." She said, "He has worked his whole life for that business." She said, "He thinks I do not know what it is worth." Mark laughed. Mark said, "Slow and steady wins the race." Then she pulled him in for another kiss, and then they drove out of whatever parking lot they had been sitting in. I closed the file. I sat at my desk for about 15 minutes without moving. I copied the entire contents of the SD card to a backup drive in my office safe. I reformatted the SD card on my computer. I put the freshly formatted card back in the dash cam. I put the dash cam back in Mark's vehicle, and I finished my notes on the parasitic drain diagnostic on his BMW like nothing was wrong. When Mark came to pick up his vehicle at 5:34 p.m. that same afternoon, I shook his hand at the counter and told him the truth. Sort of. I told him the dashcam SD card had been corrupted, and I had reformatted it for him at no extra charge. I told him the parasitic drain was the dashcam itself in parking mode, and recommended he install a hardwire kit with a low voltage cutoff so the dashcam would stop draining the battery overnight. I charged him $180 for the diagnostic. He paid in full and drove away. I closed the shop early that night. I told my mechanics I was not feeling well. I drove home in silence. I did not call anybody. I did not text anybody. I did not stop for gas or food on the way. I drove the 18 minutes home and pulled into my driveway at 6:42 p.m., and I sat in that pickup for almost an hour without getting out. When I finally walked into my house at 7:38 that evening, my wife was not home yet. Her car was gone. Her purse was gone. I went into my bedroom closet and I opened my gun safe. I have owned a small handgun for personal protection for about 11 years. I am properly licensed. I keep it for the shop because I do bank deposits twice a week with cash receipts. I had never pointed it at another human being in my entire life. I took the handgun out of the safe. I checked the magazine. I sat down on the leather chair in my living room, the one in the corner that faces my front door. I turned off every light in the house except the small lamp on the end table next to me, and I waited. I want every man listening to this to understand what was going through my head sitting in that chair. I was not thinking about prison. I was not thinking about my kids. My mother did not enter my mind. Nothing entered my mind except the fact that this woman had spent the last 4 years of her life lying to my face and was actively planning to take half the only thing I had ever built from scratch. I heard her car pull into the driveway at 9:23 p.m. I heard her open the front door at 9:25 p.m. I heard her drop her purse and her grocery bags on the foyer table. She walked into the dark living room. She saw the lamp on first. Then she saw me sitting in the chair. Then she saw what was in my right hand. She froze. She did not scream. She did not move. She just stood there in the doorway with both her hands halfway in the air. I raised the handgun. I aimed it at the center of her chest. She said, "What's wrong? Please." She started to say my name. I told her to shut her mouth. I told her I had seen the dash cam footage. I told her I had heard every word. I told her I knew about Mark. I told her I knew about the divorce plan. I told her I knew about the shop. She started crying. She started shaking her head and saying she was sorry. She started telling me she loved me. I felt my finger move toward the trigger. I want you to hear me on this. I had made the decision. In my own head, sitting in that chair, I had already made the decision to pull the trigger. And then somebody knocked on my front door. 3 solid knocks. I froze. She froze. And a familiar voice on the other side of the door said, "It was my neighbor from next door," he yelled. "Hey, just bringing back your drill." I lowered the handgun. I sat there for about 4 seconds in total silence. Then I walked to the front door, opened it 6 inches, and took the cordless drill out of George's hand. I told George thanks. George said no problem and walked back across the lawn to his own house. I closed the door. I turned around. My wife was on her knees in the foyer crying. I told her to get up, get her purse, get her keys, and leave my house. I told her not to come back. I told her if she sent anybody to this house in the next 30 days, I would have her arrested for trespassing. She left. I locked the door behind her. I unloaded the handgun. I put it back in the safe, and I called my brother at 10:08 p.m. and asked him to come stay at my house because I did not trust myself to be alone. I called a divorce attorney the next morning at 8 a.m. I drove straight to his office at 10 a.m. with the backup drive in my pocket and a full credit card and bank statement printout from the last 24 months under my arm. He took one look at the dashcam footage and one look at the credit card statements. Then he told me exactly what was about to happen. First, Ohio recognizes adultery as a fault ground for divorce under Revised Code Section 3105.01. I had clear and convincing evidence, video, audio, and her own words about the financial plan. Second, and this is the part I want every business owner listening to this video to hear, I opened my auto repair shop in 2004. I got married in 2014. Ohio Revised Code, Section 3105.171 says any property a person acquires before the date of their marriage is separate property. The shop itself was 100% mine. She had no claim to the shop building, the equipment, the lifts, the toolboxes, the tow truck, or any of it. All she could potentially claim was the increase in value of the business during the 14 years of marriage, and only if she could prove she had personally contributed to that increase. She had not. She had never worked at the shop one day in her life. She did not handle the books. She did not answer the phones. She did not even know the names of my mechanics. Her claim to my shop, the same one she had been laughing about with Mark on a dash cam, was zero. Third, financial misconduct. There is a specific paragraph buried in the Ohio statutes, paragraph E, paragraph 4 of that same property division section, that allows the court to compensate the offended spouse with what is called a distributive award when the other spouse engages in dissipation of marital funds. Spending marital funds on an affair partner counts as dissipation under Ohio law. I had 24 months of credit card statements showing about $22,000 in charges I could match to the affair, hotel rooms in 3 different Ohio cities, restaurants she had never taken me to, lingerie purchases, spa charges, even a weekend trip out of state I had thought was a real estate conference. My attorney filed the divorce petition the following week with adultery as the fault ground and financial misconduct as the basis for a distributive award. She hired her own attorney and tried to claim half of the shop value. Her attorney dropped that claim within 60 days because the math did not work. Her attorney also tried to argue for spousal support. My attorney pointed at the spousal support statute, specifically the catch-all provision that allows the court to consider any factor the judge finds relevant and equitable when deciding whether to award support. He laid out the dash cam footage, the financial misconduct, and the $22,000 in dissipated funds. The judge cut her requested spousal support in half and capped it at 24 months instead of the 7 to 10 years she was hoping for. Equitable distribution of the marital home came out to her getting roughly 38% and me getting roughly 62% because the dissipation was credited back to me as a distributive award. The shop stayed fully mine. 9 months after I sat in that leather chair with a handgun in my right hand, the divorce was final. Here is the final breakdown for every guy listening to this who needs to hear that the system actually works in Ohio. I kept the shop, the equipment, the building, the customer list, and every penny of business income going forward. I kept 62% of the marital home equity instead of the standard 50 because of the dissipation award. She walked away with 38% of the home equity, her car, her retirement account, and 24 months of reduced spousal support payments capped at less than half of what she was demanding. She lives in a rented condominium about 45 minutes from my house now. Mark went back to his wife and begged for forgiveness. His wife took him back, but I hear from one of my mechanics that he never came back to my shop for service, probably for the best. I never said anything else about the dash cam footage during the divorce proceedings. My attorney did. She found out exactly how I knew the night her own attorney sat her down and explained why she would not be getting half my shop or anything close to the spousal support she had been counting on. I am told she cried in that meeting. I do not lose sleep over it. Okay, I want every man listening to this to take something away from this story. There are guys out there right now sitting where I sat that night, in a dark living room, in a leather chair, with something in their hand they should not have in their hand, thinking about ending it for her, for him, or for themselves. I almost became one of those statistics on the news. I almost ended a 14-year marriage with a single squeeze of a trigger. I almost handed my entire shop, my entire freedom, my entire life over to a system that does not care that she lied to me for 4 years. And the only thing that stood between me and the worst decision of my entire life was a 65-year-old man named George with a cordless drill in his hand at 9:51 at night. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, pull the records. If a credit card statement is asking you a question, answer it. If she is suddenly going to the gym 5 nights a week and buying lingerie you never see, pay attention. But before you ever pick up something you cannot put back down, call your brother, call your father, call your priest, call a lawyer, call anybody, because the system works. Ohio law worked for me. My shop is still mine. My freedom is still mine. My future is still mine. And the man she chose to plan her future with, he is back home with the woman who took him in to begin with, and he will never set foot in my shop again. Do not crash out, brothers. It is not worth it. Well, in my opinion, his neighbor was the hero because, believe it or not, his neighbor was the one that stopped him from pulling that trigger. People, if someone cheats on you, crashing out is not the answer. Don't ever crash out because someone cheats on you. Until next time.